Hi, I'm Alister Benn, and this is Vision and Light. This week's guest is Alex Noriega, and Alex and I got a chance to sit down and I got to ask him the type of questions that have been on my mind for a number of years since I first became of Alex's work and his evolution as a landscape photographer. And that's exactly what I wanted to talk to him about, which is how he started, the challenges that he had to face, how he managed to identify a niche in the market that he could exist in and be himself and make the type of images that were expressive to him and what he wanted to say about the landscape and his relationship with the landscape. So we had a really, really good conversation covering a lot of this stuff and looking at how he got to where he is today and whether he feels that that's a satisfying place to be. So before we get into that though, please can you head along to the Facebook group Vision and Light, and on there we're starting to ask you on a weekly basis questions that you would like us to ask some of the guests. We'll be posting a list of future upcoming guests and the types of things that you would like to talk about. You can also suggest other photographers who you think we should be talking to, and that way we can broaden the audience and broaden the type of genre that we can actually talk about Vision and Light. So without any further babble from me, please welcome this week's guest, Mr. Alex Noriega. So, welcome to Alex Noriega. Hi, how are you doing?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, man. You're welcome. This is the third time we've spoken in a week, so it's we're making up for not being with each other at the moment. But we're still hoping that you're going to get out here in October to experience some of this type of landscape.
I'm looking forward to that. I see some shots within that image behind you that I'd really like to pursue.
Yeah, this is typically what Scotland will look like in the fall. We get quite a lot of misty atmospheric weather, and the vegetation on the hillsides is all kind of died down. And the conversation we were all having last night with the Nature Photographers Network conversation with David Kingham, Jennifer Renwick, Sarah Marino, yourself, and myself was very much about the intimate scenes and the sort of expressive photography side of things. So what I want to talk to you about today is your evolution as a landscape photographer, because I remember you back in the early days of NPN when you kind of just as a young guy, I mean, you're some years younger than me. You sort of came onto the scene, and you made quite a big impression fairly early on. You seemed to kind of emerge into the landscape photography scene almost like a fully fledged product. I don't know if that's exactly how you would remember it.
Maybe, yeah, I guess I garnered a following fairly quickly, but I don't know, fully fledged product. That depends on your definition of fully fledged.
Well, you were presenting images that seemed very mature, considering that you were quite an early photographer. I think that's really what I meant.
I think that I had the benefit of having a lot more time as I started out because I was self-employed and set my own schedule to pursue photography than most people would have. If you're picking it up as a hobby on the weekends, then you're getting a fraction of the time that I had, which is as soon as I realized that photography, the bug had bitten me, as soon as I realized that it was something that really interests me, I put all day, every day into it. I was putting in 60-hour weeks, you could say, just thinking about it all day, reading, shooting, learning. So I think I had that advantage.
So when was that? When did that fledging sort of concept begin? What year was that?
Just getting into photography.
Yeah.
That was January 2010, so a little over a decade ago.
Wow.
Um, I bought a camera for eBay and to sell things on eBay, just needed better pictures. And it had all these manual controls, and I started playing with it. And I was just kind of entranced by light and compared to the phone cameras at the time, which were Blackberries, like these little 640 by 480,
Yeah.
just terrible terrible cameras. Just seeing all the detail come through in these images and the way I could light my subject, even though it was, I don't know, a computer part or whatever I was selling. Just seeing the way light played off of things and photographing that detail and capturing it, that kind of the technical stuff pulled me in at first. And
And
I found that.
did you have any kind of artistic interest prior to this, or any inkling that light was going to fascinate you in some way?
No, not really. I mean, my dad was a painter and sculptor. And my mom dabbled in photography, but I was never taught any of that from an early age. I never really pursued art in school. I didn't know at all that this is what I was going to be doing. I just did what I was good at, which was anything pertaining to technology or computers.
All right.
Um, I I thought that's what I was going to do because that's what I was good at, and then
Okay.
I accidentally stumbled on photography. Luckily.
So yeah, so it was like some kind of realization, epiphany that all of a sudden you just got fascinated with light and the kind of technicalities of
Right.
managing light.
Yep. Yeah. Depth
Okay.
of field. I mean, any technical craftsmanship related aspect of it. I certainly wasn't interested in the art right away because I didn't even know about it. That came later.
Right. So, I mean, because 2010 was a bit of a transitional time because prior to 2010, we were struggling to overcome technical difficulties in the medium. You know, most of the film, well, I, I'm not going to say everyone had moved to digital, but digital had become sophisticated enough that people who had traditionally been film shooters were moving over because of the convenience and the cost and so forth.
Hmm.
But prior to 2010, we were in this situation where, you know, HDR had kind of blossomed into this thing to try and overcome the dynamic range issues of single exposures. And then people like Sean Bagshaw, Tony Kuiper got into the kind of blending of exposures. So you would have been getting into the scene really at a fruitful time, you know, where a lot of the kind of heavy lifting of overcoming some of these barriers had been done. Um,
Yeah, I'm fortunate that, well, not only had all these guys pioneered these sorts of techniques to overcome these technical limitations, especially in nature, where you run into huge differences in dynamic range and don't have control over the lighting. Not only had they done that, but I'd been messing around with Photoshop for like another decade before that, just for computer graphics. I don't even know what I was doing with it, but as a kid, I couldn't afford Photoshop. I had downloaded illegal copies like
yeah.
from as early as 7.0.
Okay.
I think that's around 2000. So yeah,
Yeah.
I had kind of I'd been immersed in Photoshop and the technical aspects of dealing with post processing, and I found that easy to pick up.
Okay. Right. So, you know, it was almost like the perfect moment for you to kind of emerge into the thing where the technology had got good enough to overcome a lot of the problems, and your technical mind was sufficiently tuned into how all that worked to allow you to kind of join the dots to a certain extent. Because I think that's what a lot of people struggle with is they either consider themselves artistic people or technical people, whereas you seem to strike me as someone who's more sort of 50-50.
I think that I probably do straddle the line more than most people. I think most would fall into one category or the other. But yeah, I just it's taken a while to develop artistically, or at least to realize what it is I'm doing and why. But the technical stuff just always came pretty easily.
Do you think that technical
And
freedom makes it an easier job to focus on creativity because the technical side of things isn't taking up an awful lot of your RAM, as it were?
yeah, yeah, I guess so. But also, it could probably. I think early on it hindered me because I was trying too much to do too many things in processing. Like, I mean, in that first year of photography, you said HDR was a thing. Yeah, I went through a little HDR phase, and I've
We've
found
got to
some of
see
those
some of these
files.
photographs. These
Oh
are the
man,
ones.
no, no one needs to see
These are the
that.
ransom photos.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, I just think that I was trying too hard to do too much in post, you know.
Okay.
So it could be a hindrance, I think, focusing less on composition and the artistic value of the photo and more on like how can I amp this up or how can I completely change this image, which isn't a bad thing, but what I was doing early on, I don't think was very creative necessarily.
In what sense?
Um, just that I was, you say that I splashed onto the scene or whatever, but I feel like I wasn't really making work that was unique to me.
Okay.
I was basically taking the ideas of all these guys that you mentioned, these established photographers at that time, and putting my own spin on it. But I don't think that that made the work mine. I don't think that it felt like mine. It just felt like theirs, and I was, shooting it at twilight instead, or doing something in processing that people hadn't seen combined with that kind of shot before. But I don't really think that it was my work. So
Okay.
I'm hesitant to agree that I was a fully formed product in any way at that
No, and
time.
I think more what I meant was is that what you've done is you've hit the nail on the head, because by saying that you were putting a twist on an established, acceptable type of photograph. What I really meant by that was that your images were identifiable at the time as being part of the kind of contemporary scene. Because there was a bit of a look formed in that sort of mid 2010s, sort of 12, 13, 15, 16, where there was quite a lot of homogeny started to form.
Hmm.
Where the this is where I'm going to start hanging myself, because there was always been a big difference between American landscape photographers, particularly in the Western states, and
Hmm.
European photographers. When I was kind of getting into the scene, because I was kind of out of it a little bit, because I was living in China at the time, so I wasn't in Europe, but equally I wasn't in the States. So I think I was more influenced by the United States scene because I wasn't living in Europe at the time. Um, and you seem to fit right into that. The sort of, and I think what you've really said is that your work kind of fitted in, because it was familiar, but it was different. And I think that's really what I was hitting on earlier on when I was sort of saying that you
Yeah,
kind of,
I think that there was a unique artist in me, as there is in everyone, that was waiting to come out, and I was basically holding myself back by not setting out on my own, like trying too hard to fit in at times, or just learn by replication. I saw flashes. Like if I go back and look at my super early work, I see some intimate takes on architecture, even like small scenes, unique images, and then I see like big, obvious scenes that I was essentially copying what I saw from other people and then putting a little twist on it in processing, or I got different light when I was there. Um, I saw both sides of it then, but I think that I trended more towards fitting in and the trends of the time for a couple of years there. And that's really when I feel like I lost myself. I didn't really feel like my work was me until
right. No,
I
and
got away from that.
and that's the classic juxtaposition, isn't it? Is fitting in, becoming recognizable, and being essentially popular enough to gain some kind of notoriety, offset against being unique or obscure.
Yeah, they don't need to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Uniqueness and popularity, I guess. Is that what we're on now?
Well,
Or
yeah,
notoriety. I don't know. I mean, you, I think that there's this kind of perception that like quiet work or small work or less, um, I don't know, less mainstream work has to be flying under the radar, like that it won't get popular on Instagram or social media. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think it's probably harder to break
Mm.
into the scene if you're not doing something more bold and recognizable to a wider audience. But I don't think that they have to be exclusive.
So how would one go about?
Oh, I don't know. Be lucky, like I was, that coming in at the right time. But I think that now there's more danger in just being lost in the fray of so many similar images that are all replicated essentially from a few different sources, like a few um, different styles, as you alluded to. Like there was the West Coast style at a certain time, like just whatever these influential people are that kind of start these things, it spreads down this tree of influence, and like they'll influence a few people and then they'll gain a following and then they'll influence all their followers. And I think that it's just this you could probably trace back a lot of the very popular trends to a few different people.
Sure.
And I think now there's so many people, there's so much saturation of certain types of images that it would be really difficult to stand out, even if it's an image with wide appeal. How
Right.
does it look any different than the next guy over, and how would you build a unique following that way?
Right, and this is certainly one of the things that's right at the front of my consciousness these days, because I'm I've written a lot of articles like on landscape and so forth, and obviously the ebooks, and on a number of occasions I've said that if you look at social media as the main outlet for photography in 2020, I mean, most images end up on the internet, either in social media or on people's websites. And I look on each image that we make. You've talked about yourself as uh, a low productivity type of guy focusing on quality. And so the metaphor I always use is what you're focusing on are the little diamonds. Each image that you make is a diamond which is made up of two parts. One which is the experience of being in the landscape, and noticing those things, engaging with those things, and feeling the rush of being engaged in the world to that degree. And then obviously making the image and producing the image, you produce this distillation of it to a certain extent. So when you put your images out there, because there's not many a year, I think I'm just going to assume that you look on them as quite precious little things.
At least the ones that I'm really into. I've actually started trying to be a little less restrictive on what I
Okay.
release, but then, looking at the last couple of years, it just means that I'm really only into about half of what I've put out there,
Yeah.
and then I see some issue with the other half.
So the thing I've always said is that if you look on the number of images that are on the internet, it's like a beach of grains of sand, because a lot of images just get ignored, and if each one of those does represent a little diamond of somebody's life, it's unfortunate that many of them go unnoticed.
Well, if you took the analogy further, some grains of sand will glisten and sparkle, and that kind of they stand out, but they'll change depending on your perspective. So
Right. Okay. We can run with this one.
you can just let it go, though.
Well, some grains of sand do get noticed because they glisten, and there's something about them that stands out from the other things. And I agree totally that quiet work is ironically becoming popular. People like Theo Bosboom is a great example of someone that produces super quiet work. And when he puts it onto mainstream social media like 500px or whatever, it gets absolutely ignored. But, it's absolutely precious.
It's wonderful work, and it's completely unique. Like I can spot a Theo image. I mean, I know that there's almost no one else that would have made that. So
That's right. And that was the thing that came out in the conversation I had with him a couple of weeks ago, is there's so few people that can point their camera straight down at a shingle beach and make something that's incredible,
Yeah.
So yeah, the irony is that, and the thing I'm most interested in is it's these small, anonymous, intimate images that are precious to us. The value has to be more internal rather than external. Because if we rely on external validation and popularity, it's tough to get that sometimes these days. I mean, once you gain a certain amount of popularity, you can more or less put anything out there, and enough people are going to like it to a certain extent.
Right.
But if you're just starting out, putting quiet voice work out there onto the internet, it can be quite dissatisfying for people, or discouraging for people, because they're just not getting any recognition for what they're saying.
Right. I guess I have the luxury of not knowing that struggle because it's been so long since, I mean, not that long, a decade, but um, it's been long enough that I don't really have to think about that anymore. And that's nice because I make a business out of it. But if your goal is not to make this, your life's work, and you have a different career and you're just doing this for the enjoyment, then I don't think it's as important to worry about how many people are seeing your work, or how much reach it's getting, or how much spread. I mean, it's nice to inspire people and to have people see your work, but I think it's mostly important for business if you're talking numbers. I, I I would question why you're really into it if you're extremely worried about that. I mean, I put out images that get a fraction of the likes that of other ones that I feel less strongly about and I know would do better. For example, um, I think my most liked image on Instagram is a photo of the eclipse, and it looks like everyone else's eclipse photo.
Right.
Like it means nothing to me almost. I love the eclipse. That was a
Yeah.
crazy experience, but the photo is just, it's hardly mine. It's just what an eclipse looks like,
Right. Yeah.
and that's better than everything that I've tried to do very purposefully, or anything that's meant a lot more to me. That got way more likes, so I can't gauge off of how popular something is on social media
No,
how much it's actually resonating.
I make, me, I make a lot of musical analogies because I'm a real music fan, and popular music, the stuff that's number one in the charts, isn't the best music. It's not the technically best music. It's not the most complicated music. It's not the most well-crafted music. And popularity has never been a gauge of quality in any genre, I don't think.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that great stuff can't get popular. So I guess
No,
that's kind of what I was saying earlier, is they don't have to be mutually exclusive, popularity and quality or thoughtfulness, or however we're defining quality in a photograph.
right. Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall was the first number one of the 1980s.
Wow,
That's
that's good stuff.
a little
Yeah.
piece of trivia. Now, the reason I keep asking that is because, you mentioned earlier on in the sort of early 2010s that you were making images to fit in to a certain extent. And do you think and we've kind of come full circle on that a little bit now by talking about where you are in 2020. And do you think it's a luxury that you have now, that you can be more individualistic, more artistic integrity, I suppose, and less swayed by external trends? Is it because you're established and popular, or is it because you're now confident enough in the quality of your own work?
Probably both. I think at the start, I wasn't sure what to be confident about. I wasn't sure what made certain work good. I mean, I was able to identify some great artists, I think, early on, but I also um, definitely placed a value on others' opinions more so than I do now. And it's not that I don't value others' opinions now. I just know what I'm trying to do, and I know if an image is succeeding in that or not, and whether people like it or not has nothing to do with whether I think it's successful.
Right,
Um, it is a great luxury actually, because it's my job now. It's good to be able to do whatever I want to do artistically and still make a living on it.
right.
So I don't have to have a normal job and have a boss. That's very luxurious. But I, I I guess I was just lucky to get in at the right time. And I should mention that to whatever extent that I did um, borrow from others, or basically put my own spin on others' ideas, that probably benefited me early on in building a following. Um, I don't know that if I had started out with a pure artistic mindset and tried to do my own thing from the start, that I ever would have grown the way that I did. So,
Well, this was kind of my point. Is that I think it's a curious balance between pure artistic integrity and running a business or building a business.
uh-huh.
I'm kind of in a similar situation to you now, is that I have a well-established, successful business, and we make all our living out of landscape photography, and whether it's education or workshops. But the that is a luxury that you earn to a certain extent, because
Hmm.
we see so many people these days desperately trying to break into the landscape photography scene and make a living out of landscape photography. And it's a hugely saturated marketplace in many regards. And it's just, I think what we were saying earlier, it's kind of, I think it's harder, because I came into the scene maybe 5 or 6 years before you. I think we probably turned pro round about the same kind of time, but because I had another career as well. But yeah, so what did that transition feel like from? What was it? Was it a gradual transition from where you were and the type of photographs that you were making, or was it a real moment in time where you just thought, no, this is the time for me to do my own thing and be true to what you wanted to do your own way creatively?
I think it was gradually spread over 2 years, maybe probably a 2-year transition. So there is kind of a defined time. Um, like I had mentioned early on, I think I was experimenting with some more unique imagery or just focusing on details the way that I do now. And then I kind of got pulled away from that when I entered the scene or moved to the Northwest, around all these other photographers. It's a hotbed for landscape photography up there. So I think I was influenced by the people around me, the artists around me, the scene, so to speak,
Yeah,
and that kind of pulled me away from what I might have done if I was on my own, until I just essentially got sick of it. I got bored
right,
doing that. I didn't really feel like I was engaging in the creation process. I was pretty much uh, executing the formula and putting my own spin on it and processing or getting different light, just happening to be there at a different time.
right,
I, that bored me at a certain point, and I started looking at work that was more expressive in my mind. I thought, just man, this person is really unique. What makes their work so unique? And I started studying that. Guy Tall was one of those people, and Floris Van Brugel was another guy. Just
hmm,
really great photographers, great artists, and it was like they would never make an image like this. Why? Why do they have nothing like this? And it's because they're their own artists, they're their own
right,
people. And at a certain point, I pretty much reached the apex of what I thought I could do with grand landscapes that fit within the paradigm of what was already being done.
right.
Like I have a pretty popular Mount Rainier image that um, I'll send you to put on the screen.
Okay.
Um, that's it's one of my favorite images, but I also feel like it's pretty much the culmination of like 5 years of doing that.
Yeah.
It's like the best I could possibly do. And then I was like, where do I go from here? I don't think I can do anything better than this
Right.
in an image that's like this. Um, and so that was around 2015, 16. I started shifting.
Yep.
So after about 5 years, and that's also when I had become somewhat established in terms of making it a business. I think 2014 is when that started. And so I'd had a couple of solid years and started thinking, okay, well, I have a following. I can make some money on this. So I don't
Yep.
have to worry about getting seen. I'm going to start doing more unique things that are more my wheelhouse, more speaking to me as an artist. And yeah, around 2016, I think I really started going down that path exclusively.
And did you notice any kind of significant psychological, emotional change that happened at that same time, or has begun to manifest itself since doing that?
Um, in myself as a person outside of photography, or
Yeah,
just as it pertains to the images?
yeah, as you as a person.
Um, I guess confidence. I feel more confident in myself as an artist because I I I guess I'm confident that the images are mine and that I've added something to the world or to whoever gains inspiration from it. I've created something of value, and so I feel confident that that I can do that as an artist. I really didn't think that I could before because I had come from such a technical background.
Right.
I started thinking, well, I'm not an artist. I can't be artistic. I can't be creative. What I can do is operate a camera really well, operate Photoshop really well. I can think analytically and put these compositions together within this formula and process them adequately. But I didn't really feel like I was being creative because I felt like I didn't have that in me. And I
Okay.
guess going in this direction that I've gone with my work, it's given me confidence that, yeah, I'm an artist. Like I, I'm not a painter. I wish I could be a painter, but um, within the realm of photography, I at least feel like I'm an artist now. So
Right. So I'm going to poke you just a little bit more on that
yeah.
one because what what you did was you actually put the focus back onto the creative part, the photography based part of it.
Hmm.
Whereas I think my actual question was probably more focused in on, do you feel happier as a person
Oh,
as opposed to an artist? Is that
yeah.
manifesting changes in you as a person?
Yeah. Well, I think it affects my whole life because this is my career. And it's so much of my social circle now. Like the fact that I feel like I have a unique standing in um, the world around me, aside from the friends and connections I already had outside of photography. A big part of my world is photography now. And it feels
Yeah.
great to feel like you have a place. I don't know. So,
Yeah,
um,
I can understand what you're saying because I mean I'm in a kind of similar place where I mean the conversation I had with Guy Tal, we touched on depression and having dark periods in our lives and stuff like that. And since I've become what I would consider more creatively uh, or having more creative integrity, and whereas I feel I'm being me and I feel that my images are actually saying something about me and they're allowing me to access parts of my emotional spectrum that perhaps were shut down for some reason.
mhm.
I think now a lot more of that spectrum is valid to me, allows me to be less anxious and less stressed. And I just feel happier in the world and in my own skin. So I think I just wonder if there's a correlation between uh, doing something that is truly us versus doing something that is either to get popular or to fit in with our peers or to be seen to be doing a certain type of thing that's societally acceptable. I just wonder if there's something in our core that if you're doing your own thing and you're true to yourself, that it actually makes you happy.
Oh, I think for sure. I think that I knew to some extent that, I mean, I basically felt like like a fraud, or like I had imposter syndrome. Like I shouldn't even have the following that I have because all I'm doing is following this formula and basically riffing off other people's ideas. And I still, take inspiration from everywhere. I should qualify that because
Of
I'm not,
course.
not it doesn't come from a vacuum. I'm gaining inspiration all the time, but I feel like I'm much more satisfied for sure. Feeling like I'm a lot more involved in the process.
The reason I'm smiling is when you started the sentence, the word vacuum popped up in my head. It's just the language. I think we speak as a very similar language when we're explaining these things. I think partially that comes from a teaching context, is how to articulate it. You're somewhat limited with the language that's available to you. And I just think certain metaphors lend themselves really well.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be able to form coherent thoughts on any of this if I didn't do like podcasts, interviews, workshops. I think it's great. This is another discussion, but I think teaching is really interesting because it makes you aware of things that you're not even aware you're doing until you have to
Right.
speak it out loud. So,
I could easily spin this whole conversation out for another hour because I think there's more uh, there's definitely more poking to be done in terms of some of that, just how we articulate the innate, and that as we have to explain it to somebody else, it forces you to very closely examine. Now, one final question, because I think we're going to start getting into the sort of heading towards an hour territory by the time this is finished, this question. Is do you think the level of self-analysis necessary to articulate what you do innately actually benefits your creative process and your development as a creative person? Or do you think just doing it innately for the love of it would get you in a similar direction in its own?
I don't think it hurts to know more. I just think that, but that probably depends on the person, because if you're kind of an overthinker and you're very analytical, then you might be getting in your own way if you start thinking too hard about what you're doing. Luckily for me, I'm a pretty poor multitasker, so when I get engaged in the process of composition, like if when I'm actually arranging things in the frame and engaging with a subject that I am entranced by, I kind of forget what I'm doing and just kind of do it innately because I just don't have the mental bandwidth to be thinking analytically. That comes later when I'm analyzing the image.
Okay.
So I think if you're a certain kind of person, you could certainly get in your own way, but I don't think it hurts to know more about what I'm doing. I think that helps me decide later what images have value and which ones, I can think more analytically about an image when I know why I appreciate certain aspects of it or don't.
So, what sort of attributes within the image are likely to trigger that feeling of value in you?
Uniqueness, not from a perspective of wanting to stand out from the crowd, but just feeling more attached to the image. I feel more attached to images that I feel like are mine uniquely. And so even if I've seen that motif before or that subject photographed or a similar layout to a composition, when I find something that's only mine, some little slice of nature somewhere, and I've executed it in a way that satisfies all my requirements in terms of composition and everything's working, I really feel like that photo it has a lot of value because it can never be found again, possibly even by myself, but definitely by no one else. I've made something unique. So that's a huge point. Another thing is if the image has a very particular atmosphere or feeling, I want it to transport me to another place in my mind. So those are kind of the two things that really make my most valuable images feel so to me.
Okay, that's. I'm getting a lot out of this. I'm thoroughly enjoying listening to the contents of your mind. One, if I can remember it, I was going to take one final question, but it seems to
I
be a
thought
little
that
bit.
was the final question.
Yeah, well, I'm getting cheeky. Right, what we'll do is we will leave it there. If I think of the final question, I'll put it in a note somewhere. I'll get an email out of you. I'm really hoping that we get the opportunity to run this trip in October that we have planned in the west of Scotland. I think the concept of you and Taylor coming over and us spending a few days traveling around Scotland and showing you some of our secret little havens, which are far from the popular crowd, and then obviously taking the participants out to beautiful places. And I think the joy for me is going to be seeing you there for the first time, because we're going to places that I know really well. And it's going to be so interesting to see how your eyes see them and how different your approach may be from my own. I think that's going to be quite an interesting thing for the participants as well, is to see that juxtaposition.
That's what I was going to say. The participants, I haven't been to Scotland before, but I don't think that that means that you can't learn from seeing the way someone approaches something for the first time. And in fact, that can be more valuable in some ways than someone who's really familiar. Um, just because the way that these participants are any photographer is coming to a new location. I mean, that's a skill you have to have. You have to be able to find something new when you don't already know where it
Absolutely.
is. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah, I'll try and get us to the right place at the right time and leave the rest to you.
Yeah, well,
Although,
that said, it's really great to know where to go and not just aim or wander aimlessly. Yeah.
yeah, that's the thing, and we're going to places that are so diverse, and the weather, like in my backdrop, it's quite often kind of really atmospheric. So therefore, you're relying the natural elements of the landscape to deliver the engagement rather than just relying on glorious light. And although that's
Yeah.
perfectly possible as well.
Yeah. Well, just reacting to what's around you.
Right.
And I think that I lost that thought.
Yeah.
Might be
So
running on too long then.
yeah, the one I was going to come out with for you is completely gone as well. So it's
Oh,
but I'm old, so I have an excuse.
oh, so I don't have an excuse.
Not yet, not yet.
Okay.
If you're going to be 45 at least before you can start just having
I
random amnesia.
think I'm already there.
Listen, Alex, I hope you've enjoyed this, and
Definitely.
I'm really looking forward to future conversations. And of course, I can't wait for us, the four of us, and the lucky folks to be out traveling together in Scotland. That'll be amazing. So,
Yeah, that'll be
thank you
great.
very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you again today.
Thanks for having me, Alistair.
You're no worries, man. All the best.